John mentioned, we're beginning a little early because the three port commissioners here have an important meeting, a pre-budget meeting coming up tonight at 7, so they need to be away, so we're happy to accommodate them. On behalf of the Edmonds Senior Center, we're delighted to have you here this evening. Our president, Bob Reinhardt, is in the back. So there's Bob. If you have anything to say about the Senior Center, talk to Bob. We're really excited. I have a couple of drawings up here about the new building. If all goes well, we'll break some ground. We would break ground either late summer or early fall of next year, 2018. Be away for a year, but in facilities that will enable us to continue essentially all our programs, or almost all our programs, and then be back in a year. It's a kind of amazing both challenge but also opportunity, and the need is great. If you walk around this building just trying to stay steady, you'll understand why the need is ever more apparent. So I think rather than give you a long speech, I'm going to give it over to John Reed of ACE. We've hosted these before with ACE, and we do so again. John.
Thanks, Earl. Welcome to all of you, and especially to the candidates for Edmonds Port Commissioner and City Council. I represent the Alliance of Citizens for Edmonds, ACE. Gretchen and I raised our family in Edmonds and have lived in the Bowl for almost 41 years. I served 7 years on the Edmonds Planning Board from 2007 to 2013. ACE was founded in 2004. We support responsible development that respects and complements the character of Edmonds. We attempt to provide citizens with accurate factual information about land use activities and potential changes so they can make informed decisions and provide relevant input to our elected leaders. We also promote preservation of the national environment in the city. ACE is a 501c4 nonprofit organization. We do not endorse candidates for public office. And I should mention here, we have not shared questions with any of the candidates. The first time we're going to hear from this tonight. We've done 6 forums since we started doing these in 2007. Before moving on to the forum, I want to take a minute to share what, to many of us involved with ACE and to some of our port commissioners, the unexpected loss of someone many of us know and respect, Eric Livingston. He had agreed to moderate this forum. He became ill after returning from an anniversary trip to Europe, and he passed away last Tuesday. He was a valued member of ACE with many on-point comments in our meetings, often accompanied by perceptive, humorous comments. He also was a member of the Historic Preservation Commission. Please keep his wife, Eliza Saunders, and his extended family in your prayers. We will miss him. Our timer, once again, is Nim Edelstein. She's over there with a bright yellow sweater. Mr. Bulow will state the amount of time that each of you have to respond to the questions, so you'll know that. And then Mim will flash a yellow card telling you you have 15 seconds left. And then she has a red card and a bell. And when you hear the bell, you need to stop talking, but we have to exercise the third option. Dave Bulow is a member of ACE and has been for several years, and he's a 14-year resident of Edmonds, and he agreed on very short notice to moderate tonight's forum, for which I'm very appreciative. Please welcome Dave Bulow.
Thank you, John, and welcome all candidates, incumbents, audience. I've never done this before, so bear with me. I am a member of ACE, but I promise to be impartial. One of the things I wanted to ask is that everyone be respectful. I think that's an issue in the society we live in right now, so candidates know one another. I'm sure they'll be respectful of one another. Audience will allow you to applaud at the end of the evening or at the end of this session. Please don't provide any comments before that time. And especially be respectful of the moderator, because he's very tender right now. So we're going to have 2 sections tonight. The first is the port, and the second will be the council. Each is going to be approximately an hour. We're going to have to change name tags and water glasses and things, so there'll be a short 5-minute break in between. And the port is, I think Farrell mentioned, is going first because they've got an important budget meeting this evening. So when the closing comments are done, I'm going to Mr. Johnson is going to go first, so he will be excused. It isn't because we're mad at him. It isn't because he did anything wrong. So they can all leave when they're done with their closing comments. Unless you want to stay and listen to the other closing comments, that's fine too. So for the format this evening, we're going to have 4 questions. They're the same questions for each candidate, but we are going to switch up the sequence, and the candidates are going to answer with their opponent. And we're going to alternate the answers between the opponents. They will have 90 seconds to answer the questions. At the end of the set questions that we have, each candidate is going to be able to pose a question to their opponent, and they have 15 seconds to get through that question, and then the opponent has 60 seconds to answer. And then we'll end that portion of the program with 60 seconds, 1 minute, for each to give a closing statement. Having said all that, you might have noticed that there's 6 people up here, and there's 5, and there should be 6 if we had everybody here. Ms. Harris is unable to attend this evening, and so I will be reading a 3-minute statement from her. Mr. Gouge is her opponent, and he will be answering the questions this evening, and then at the end, because he won't be able to ask her a question, and him, there's a little bit of extra time, so he's going to get 2 minutes for his closing statement instead of 1 minute. So I'm now going to read a statement from Ms. Harris that she can't be here. So these are her words. This statement is being read on behalf of and in the voice of Angela Harris, running for Port Commissioner in District 1. Good evening, everyone. Please accept my apologies for not being with you tonight. I'm leading a major project for Microsoft that is unprecedented in my 12.5 years at Microsoft, and fortunately, things will be back to normal by December. I've learned in my life through a variety of circumstances to look at research, information, and facts. My circumstances have made me stronger, propelling me through my 20-year business career, from starting my own consulting company to landing at Microsoft, where I excel in my role due to my ability to work collaboratively, my honesty, my ability to bring stability to research, plan, and execute on those plans, and to do all this with integrity. It's with this tenacity and focus that I've dived into the facts of the Port of Edmonds, spending countless hours in research, reading past meeting minutes, plans, vision documents, and talking to people who have been part of the community for longer than I. My opponent attacked me personally at the last forum, stating I'm not interested nor knowledgeable about the port. He couldn't be more wrong. The research I have done is the most effective way to educate myself on port matters. Here are some of the facts I have learned about the Port of Edmonds that have led me to seek the position of Port Commissioner, District 1. The Port of Edmonds has spent $84,000 of public money to challenge the Shoreline Master Program and buffers advised by the Department of Ecology. The commissioners wanted the buffers reduced. The current Port Commissioner hired a public relations The current Port Commission hired a public relations firm to promote how environmentally friendly they have been by cleaning up Harbor Square. The cleanup was not voluntary. It was in response to a tenant lawsuit and action by Department of Ecology. It was also fully reimbursed primarily by Unical. It was also years ago, and the property is still toxic today. The current Port Commission wants the public to believe that their Harbor Square master plan, which includes up to 55-foot buildings and approximately 350 condominiums, is no longer being considered. However, the plan has been adopted into their strategic plan and is posted on the Port of Edmonds website. The minutes of the Port Commissioner's March 1st, 2017 meeting include the following statement when talking about the Harbor Square master plan and keeping it on record. This is in quotes. Community tenor is changing, and eventually the makeup of the City Council will change as well, close quotes. Commissioner Gouge even said in his candidate statement in 2013, open quotes, I will continue to push for redevelopment by getting changes to the City Council, close quotes. Make no mistake, the Harbor Square Master Plan is still the plan of record for the port and has been since 2012. These are just a few of the facts that influenced my decision. Let's not hang on to old plans. Let's update our plans. Thank you, Mim. For the port. We'll look ahead to daylighting Willow Creek. I'm capable, I'm willing, I'm excited to represent District 1 in all ports. Thank you. Angela Harris, candidate for Port Commission District 1. So we'll now move ahead with the questions. Mr. Gouge will have the first question. As I said, there are 4 questions, so they'll be routed through and everybody will have a chance to answer these same questions. The first question for Mr. Gouge is regarding Harbor Square redevelopment. The question is, despite rejection of the port's master plan for Harbor Square by City Council in 2013, the port in March of 2014 added what essentially is the same rejected plan to its east side master plan. Major issues in the port plan are zoning is changed from commercial to mixed commercial residential uses. Building height is increased from the current 35 feet to an overall average height of 45 feet, and maximum height up to 55 feet adjacent to the marsh. And minimum setback off Dayton Street is 15-foot sidewalk, and no stated setback from the marsh is included as compared to the 25-foot setback originally included in the port proposal. Do you support the specific parameters listed above, and why or why not? Mr. Gouge, you have 90 seconds.
Well, first of all, the City Council did not reject the plan. The port pulled the plan. Go back and look at the minutes from 2013. I testified at City Council. I also testified at City Council in March and port meetings that the port master plan is we are not going to build anything over at Harbor Square. We have invested almost $1.8 or $1.9 million in roofs and in HVA systems. We've gone from 85% occupancy to 90% occupancy at Harbor Square. I have again stated many times that we are not doing anything over there. Why would we take all the money that we spent redoing the roofs and making clean roofs, redoing the drain systems, and then still plan on building something? Our job is to look out for the taxpayer of Edmonds and Woodway. What we need to do is look at the economics of everything we do. We, as port commissioners, look at a 50,000-foot view. That means we think, we brainstorm. But what goes in the master plan is we have to have a harbor plan of scheme and improvements per the RCWs. And we're not doing the west side of the tracks, we're not doing anything at all, except we have a shoreline master plan now for a building to do a 25-foot tall building over there. So you just got to look at the total facts, not the rhetoric. And I do not believe we will ever build anything over at Harbor Square as long as I'm a commissioner. It would not be economically feasible for the citizens of this community. We have over 800 employees and 60-some businesses on our properties. We will not do that.
Thank you, Mr. Gouge. The next question is for Mr. Ferris and Ms. Petzo. The question is regarding transparency. What changes would you make in port meeting, publicity, and decision-making procedures to increase transparency and encourage community involvement and input into your decision-making process? And on this one, Mr. Ferris goes first.
Transparency. Thank you. Transparency. Well, turning it on is good.
Is that working? That's working. Transparency, anyway. The port has a problem with transparency because nobody comes to our meetings because, as near as I can tell, everybody thinks it's going to find out. Okay, let's talk about what we've tried to do. We've tried to communicate with open meetings. We've tried to communicate with the City Council on various and sundry City Council turf and port turf regarding what's happening at the port and specifically what's happening at Harbor Square. We probably weren't doing as good a job as we could have a year or two ago because it costs money to send out brochures and tell everybody in the Port District what's happening. And we perceived that we were not, and we decided, the commission decided, that we needed to do a much better job at advising the constituency in the Port District as to what the status of the port was and what we're trying to do. We've done that. I think you've seen two different publications from the port in your mailbox that have talked about what's happening at the port from an economic perspective, and I think one of them was from an environmental perspective. So it's difficult. You can never do enough to get everybody involved, okay? But it's incumbent upon any public office, and particularly the port, to do everything we can do, including spending your money, to be sure that you understand what's going on down at the port. And we appreciate any inputs we have on how to do a better job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perez. Ms. Petzo, do you need the question again?
Thank you. I think whoops, need to put it back on, eh? Thank you. I think I've got it. It's about transparency and about the port's responsiveness, which is one of the reasons I am running. In order to get people to come to your meetings, and they do come to the port meetings, you can see it in the minutes, you have to respond to their concerns. If somebody comes to a port meeting and asks a question about a subject, and it's dropped, there is no further discussion, then you are not going to get people to come to your meetings. Another option would be to attempt to pay somebody to come from My Edmonds News, who's broadcasting presumably here tonight, and follows the city council closely. And finally, you need to have an ongoing public engagement. Special purpose districts do not send out brochures only when it's an election year. They send them out once or twice a year. If you think about it, your water district may contact you, your power provider may contact you a couple of times a year, just to share information with you, just to make sure you know that they're there. So there's a lot the port could be doing other than election year brochures, which don't really carry the impression of being sincere public interaction. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Petzo. The next question is regarding the marsh, and it's directed to Mr. Johnston and then to Ms. Payne. The question is, if the opportunity arose, what redevelopments on the land areas surrounding the marsh would you propose to incorporate with the marsh as an asset rather than a hindrance to development?
Interesting question. Just for I got a green light. Can everybody hear me? No. Okay, I'll speak up.
Try this one.
Okay. Yeah.
That one works.
Hello? Okay, great. Okay, thank you. We had the opportunity to offer up a scheme, if you will, or a concept for redevelopment of Harbor Square. Any type of development or redevelopment at the Harbor Square site will have to pencil out. They'll have to have a reasonable return on investment for someone to undertake that. There are ways that you could develop a site plan that would be compatible with the marsh, and in some components of the plan that it was already offered up for consideration did just that. There's lots of green space. There was a big access way going straight to the marsh so people could access the marsh, etc. But the trade-off of that, unfortunately, is the more green space you offer up, the more denser and larger your buildings have to be to offset that. Ports have to show reasonable return on investment on any undertaking they take. Yes, it is possible to redevelop Harbor Square sometime in the future, but it will entail by its very nature structures and buildings that will be perhaps somewhat out of scale so we can have the amenities close to the marsh.
Thank you. Ms. Payne, are you okay, or do you need the question?
One more time.
Now I have to find it. If the opportunity arose, what redevelopments on the land areas surrounding the marsh would you propose to incorporate with the marsh as an asset rather than a hindrance to development?
Well, okay, thank you. What I would like to have see down there at the Harbor Square area right now is I would like to have it be environmentally focused. You still can't hear me, huh? Okay, so Okay, phone works. I'd like to have it be environmentally focused and have an environmental learning center, conference center down there that would go ahead and highlight the aspects of the restoration of the marsh. There are environmental learning centers that are scattered across this, the parks departments for the city of Seattle. You can go ahead and add that without impacting the return on investment, which is important. The current finances for the port is that they have an $8 million operating budget, and then they bring in $9.5, maybe $9.6 or $7 million. So there is a surplus of in excess of like over $1 million. So there's plenty of return on investment as it stands right now. There can be opportunities to go ahead and put new investments in at the Harbor Square plan, Harbor Square area, to go ahead and highlight the marsh and highlight any restoration activities for the marsh. That's what I would like to see.
Thank you. We're back to Mr. Gouge. Mr. Gouge, the next question is regarding climate change. What steps would you propose the port take to address the numerous impacts of climate change, such as water quality, water shortages, rising sea levels, and increased energy consumption?
Well, first of all, I attended the final report from the Western Washington Students' Report on climate change here at City Hall meeting, sometime back in the spring here. One of the things we learned was about the 2-foot sea rise level and then the king tides. So we have to prepare ourselves. One, water quality. What they were talking about was when the marsh would be daylighted, that a big king tide would come in and pretty much wipe out the marsh. So we already have, on any new construction, we have to go in and we're going to raise 2 feet up the ground level. So any buildings that will be built in the next 50, 100 years, 20 years, whatever, will be raised up. The water quality is something more of a city issue. I mean, here again, the city is responsible for our water, not the port. And just like the marsh, the city owns 90% of the marsh and they're responsible for it. We have gone well above and beyond the call of duty, spending taxpayer dollars and other dollars in the marsh. And so we're the only entity that has ever spent money in the marsh. So what we really have to think about is when we are going to have high tide rise, and if you actually go look at the maps, what WWSU students did, where we see where the breakwater is going to hold back some of the high tide, the trains are going to hold back, and the map really affected people all the way up to about 2nd Avenue or so, and very not many homes. So that's one of the things, but we're looking at it, and I was the only person with the city council that attended some of those meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Gouge. We're now back to Ms. Petso and then Mr. Ferris. Ms. Petso, you are first on this question. And then Mr. Ferris. This question is again the Harbor Square redevelopment question. Would you like me to reread it? It's rather long. Okay, I will. Despite rejection of the port's master plan for the Harbor Square by City Council in 2013, the port in March 2014 added what essentially is the same rejected plan in its East Side master plan. Major issues in the port plan are zoning has changed from commercial to mixed commercial/residential uses. Building height is increased from the current 35 feet to an overall average height of 45 feet and maximum height of up to 55 feet adjacent to the marsh. And minimum setback off Dayton Street is a 15-foot sidewalk, and no stated setback from the marsh is included as compared to the 25-foot setback originally included in the port proposal. Do you support the specific parameters listed above, and why or why not? Again, it's Ms. Petso and then Mr. Ferris.
Thank you. No, I do not support all of the components of that plan as it now stands adopted by the Port Commission. If elected, I would like to reopen discussion of the Harbor Square Master Plan for public input and for changes. The largest change that I would like to see concerns the failure to include an appropriate marsh setback, or indeed perhaps any exact number for the marsh setback. If we put a proper marsh setback and a plan for marsh restoration into the Harbor Square Master Plan, we might well find that we can then apply for grant funding to help us pay for that. There are people in this community extremely skilled at cobbling together this grant plus that grant plus this local funding to do a project. An example might be the Hazel Miller Plaza, which I believe was done almost entirely, if not entirely, with grant funding in the end. We need to give those people a chance, which means you need to put it in the plan. Now, it doesn't have to be all at once, but let's say someday that the athletic club approaches us and says, you know, we really don't need that outdoor tennis court. Great, good, that's phase 4 of our buffer restoration project. Let's go get the money and we'll vegetate that and make it part of the buffer. And over time, we could restore that buffer.
Mr. Ferris, your turn.
Why don't you repeat the question again, please?
Despite rejection of the port's master plan for Harbor Square by City Council in 2013, the port in March of 2014 added what is essentially the same rejected plan in its east side master plan. Major issues in the port plan are zoning is changed from commercial to mixed commercial / residential uses. Building height is increased from the current 35 feet to an overall average height of 45 feet and maximum height of up to 55 feet adjacent to the marsh. And minimum setback off Dayton Street is a 15-foot sidewalk and no stated setback from the marsh is included as compared to the 25-foot setback originally included in the port proposal. Do you support the specific parameters listed above and why or why not?
In response, I've got to tell you that I do not support the specific parameters because that was an example of a plan. A little history is necessary. The port proposed a change to the addendum to the comp plan in 2012, I think. In order to have a real plan, and not just a paper study, but a nice book on the shelf, the port put together a minimally economically viable plan for Harbor Square. That means if it had anything less, it wouldn't have the open spaces and public spaces. If you want shorter buildings at Harbor Square, you're going to have to give up the plazas. You're going to have to give up the corridor that existed from the northeast corner down to the marsh. These were public amenities the port thought was in the community's best interest. It doesn't really matter, however, because that was the minimum plan that we thought was economically viable. The community, in the person of the people of the city council, decided that they weren't going to approve that plan, and the port respects the decisions of the city council. Therefore, the port has no plans to redevelop Harbor Square under any conditions at this point. We've put in very long-term roofs. We've put in new HVAC and air conditioning systems. They're going to last 20, 30 years. We're not preparing to do anything, not proposing to do anything other than do our best to run Harbor Square under the present zoning conditions in the interest of our constituents. Thank you.
That was right on.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. The next question is for Ms. Payne and then Mr. Johnson, and Ms. Payne will go first. This is the question regarding transparency. The question is, what changes would you make in port meeting, publicity, and decision-making procedures to increase transparency and encourage community involvement and input into your decision-making process?
Thank you. That's a great question. What I would like to have happen is I would like to have there be a regular meeting, minute taker, if not that, then have those meetings recorded down at the port. These are interesting meetings, they're not long, and that can go ahead and get transferred over to our local media systems, and then they can go ahead and write notes out and send that out to the community about what the topics were. That would be simple to do, would cost very little money, and that can happen instantaneously. The problem with not having really great communications out to the community, and I mean the broader community, the city of Woodway will have impacts, the city of Edmonds will have impacts on what happens down here at the waterfront. We all love the waterfront. The port's a beautiful port, and we have a terrific asset there with the marsh. That's what brings people in. We need to let everybody know what's going on in the city of Edmonds and all of the stakeholders, the business owners, the residents that are nearby and far away, about what's going on down here at the waterfront. We all love the waterfront. We need to let everybody know what's going on. By not having broad stakeholder input, we end up with having systems and plans that fail. The Harbor Square Master Plan is one of those plans that have failed. If they had broader input from the community, then they would have had better opportunities to go ahead and collect that information from the community that could be supported both by the community and City Council.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, would you like the question reread?
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry?
Johnston.
Yes.
I thought that's what I was saying. I'm sorry. Put in the upper plate, how's that? What changes would you make in port meeting, publicity, and decision-making procedures to increase transparency and encourage community involvement and input into your decision-making process?
Well, I'm fairly new to the commission. I've only been there for about a year and a half. I've attended meetings for a long time about various subjects, mostly Harbor Square redevelopment and cleanup subjects over the years. And I, as a citizen, not as a commissioner, always found the port to be extraordinarily transparent. If people show up at the meetings they want to show up at, when the interest peaks, as far as the communications plan that we just put into place, we've hired a communications expert. Every lament I hear from public ports is nobody understands what we do. This is port-wide. Nobody understands what we do. They don't understand what our mission is. They don't understand what we've done. They don't understand what we've accomplished for the community. We have now stood up a communications plan with a social media aspect to it. A communications specialist is helping us with it part-time. She also does other things for the port. And we will see more of these so-called glossy brochures because we're going to communicate what the port is up to. I think that's going to generate the interest that's going to bring more people to port meetings in the future. But as far as transparency, I as a resident appearing at port meetings and I as a commissioner see a tremendous amount of transparency. And as for the Harbor Square Master Plan concept, that was a totally public, transparent process throughout. And many people, including many people in this room, participated in it. The board is transparent, and I'm very proud to be part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. Did I get it?
Thank you, sir.
And I apologize if I was leaving out the T before. I thought I had it. Mr. Gouch, the next question is for you, and it's a question regarding impacts on the marsh. The question is, if the opportunity arose, what redevelopments on the on the land areas surrounding the marsh would you propose to incorporate with the marsh as an asset rather than a hindrance to development?
Well, first of all, when we had our villa as the Parks and Rec director back in the early 2000s, we proposed doing some educational things when we had Bill Toski as our executive director. That was Commissioner Ferris, myself, and Kent Reed were commissioners. We were told, keep our hands off the city's marsh. So we did. We kept our hands off the city's marsh. We were told, nope, you're not going to put any paths around there. You're not going to put any educational stuff around there. But what the port has done is we have that beautiful walkway on the south side of Harbor Square and on the north side of the marsh. There again, we only own 10%. We all need to get together. I mean, we help with the Audubon Society, the Bird Fest. We do a lot of those great things. I was out birding today, counting birds up in Skagit County, snow geese, ducks with Fish and Wildlife. So that's some of the things I personally do, and I spend a lot of money trying to do that personally, but what we need to do is make sure that we don't do any development around Harbor Square for many, many years. I just don't believe we should do any development, and we have to find out what we're allowed to do near the marsh from ecology, and we need to be mindful of the species that are there, that we don't disrupt them. So you just can't have people walking around and through. I've worked with the community college, Gene Hernandez, the president, to try to get people from Edmonds Community College to come down and work with that. We've worked with the youth groups, the school districts. So we've been working quite well trying to get other people involved in the marsh. But you have to stay, it's got to be hands-off and distance.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Ferris and Ms. Petso. Once again, Mr. Ferris, it's your turn to go first. This is the question regarding climate change, and it is, what steps would you propose the port take to address the numerous impacts of climate change, such as water quality, water shortages, rising sea levels, and increased energy consumption.
See if I can make this thing work.
Is it working? Yes, it's working. It turns out that your port is far from omnipotent in this regard. We can control relatively little of that. The part that we can control, we fought diligently for, specifically the rise of the ground floor 2 feet above what it had been previously during the process with the city council a year ago. That was necessary in order to accommodate anticipated groundwater rise. In terms of water quality, we have and we continue to work diligently every way we can think of that makes any economic sense to ensure that the quality of the water, of the stormwater runoff from Harbor Square is the best it can be. And as a matter of fact, I gotta tell you, the port has done a whole heck of a lot more than any other single entity or all of the other entities put together relative to improving the stormwater runoff quality into the marsh. That's important to note. We only contribute 3% of that stormwater runoff. We've cleaned our stuff up. It turns out that as the need arises, as the opportunities arise, the port will continue to improve the quality of the stormwater runoff out of Harbor Square because we can do that. And you're telling me I got 15 seconds. I think we're doing a good job. We can't control very much of it, and insofar as we can control it, we have fought diligently to in fact have that opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Ms. Petzo, would you like the question read again?
Please.
The question is regarding climate change. What steps would you propose the port take to address the numerous impacts of climate change, such as water quality, water shortages, rising sea levels, and increased energy consumption?
Thank you. A number of these suggestions suggestions towards this question have already been made to me as I walk around and talk to people about the port. There's been expressed an interest in the port taking more responsibility for supplying its own power, whether that be through solar or wind power or some combination thereof. There have been expressed interests about the port looking into some of the ideas provided by the college students who gave a menu of suggestions to improve stormwater quality, some of which are perhaps not practical at this site or too expensive, but others of which could be further explored with the possibility of actually implementing something. And finally, there's a keen interest in the effect of daylighting Willow Creek, because that will provide some natural flushing for the quality of water in the marsh, and it would be a tremendous help. Unfortunately, when there is as yet no tangible action that we can point to by the port saying, yes, here's what we're going to do about that. Even setting aside a sum of money might help. Just say, okay, here's $100,000 we're appropriating just to help cover our portion of the daylighting projects on Willow Creek. Maybe setting a good example for other agencies and other entities to get on with it, and when they get on with it, we can say we've got ours ready. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Petzo. The next question is for Mr. Johnston and then Ms. Payne. And it's the question regarding Harbor Square redevelopment. Despite rejection of the port's master plan for Harbor Square by City Council in 2013, the port in March 2014 added what essentially is the same rejected plan in its East Side master plan. Major issues in the port plan are zoning, change from commercial to mixed commercial residential. Building height is increased from the current 35 feet to an overall average height of 45 feet and maximum height of up to 55 feet adjacent to the marsh. And minimum setback off Dayton Street is a 15-foot sidewalk, and no stated setback from the marsh is included as compared to the 25-foot setback originally included in the port proposal. Do you support the specific parameters listed above, and why or why not?
In a word, no. I was always a proponent for larger buffers than the 25-foot buffer set in place in 1981. Back then it might have been okay, it's not okay now, but I was not a proponent of the 125-foot buffers that the city established as part of their Shorelines Master Plan. I think there's a compromise there. I would look for a 50 to 65-foot setback with engineered improvements to address stormwater and other marsh impacts. I think that's a prudent way to go. The Toledo tribe agrees with us, our own people, indigenous people agree with that, as do most marsh experts, fish experts, and scientists. That is the way you protect the marsh. So no, I don't agree with the setbacks and buffers put in place there. As far as building densities and heights, we've already talked about that. If you want to have amenities near the marsh, then you're probably going to have denser and more taller or bulkier buildings elsewhere on the site. The project has to pencil out. I also agree that I would retain the mixed-use concept of that plan because I think residential use with commercial use would be a great use of that site. But the bottom line is none of that's going to happen. The Harbor Square plan was a placeholder. It was placed in on our website as a part of our plan to hold and to meet the state requirements for having a plan. And that's what it did. Other than that, I don't think you're going to see any redevelopment of Harbor Square in the near-term future, certainly not while I'm a Port Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Payne?
Got it.
You've got it?
Yes, thank you.
Hallelujah. Thank you.
Thank you, yes, well, this is the third time. Thank you very much. No, I would not agree with the Harbor Square Master Plan as it has been proposed. I have a terrific objection to having residential anywhere down at the waterfront, and let me tell you why. Having tall buildings down at the waterfront occludes other people's views and it privatizes the visual access to some of our natural environment, the natural area next to the marsh and also the waterfront. Once you put in residential, you have it there forever. Everybody has walked along the waterfront here and has gone past the ebb tide and they bump into it and they say, oh, private property. And they dutifully walk around. That was older technology. Having residential there really stops any other sort of flexibility with development practices, any economic development opportunities that might come up 15, 20, 30 years from now. And the other problem that I have with it is that it privatizes those views. Those are views that people will pay top dollar for, and you have to build up. We can't have tall buildings down here that are not code compliant. They have to stay within the code. I don't think there needs to be any changes going on right now down at the Harbor Square Master Plan, and that needs to go ahead and we need to find better paths to work, and work with the community and bring plans forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. Mr. Gouge, back to you. You have the question on transparency now. What changes would you make in port meeting, publicity, and decision-making procedures to increase transparency and encourage community involvement and input into your decision-making process?
Well, first of all, we do have a professional note taker since I've been there for over 18 years. So our notes are taken by our gal and they're recorded, so they are available. We have asked My Edmonds News to come down. We've asked many people to come down to our meetings. We have in the Edmonds Beacon, we have a column. Our executive director writes a column. Every 4, 5, 6 weeks there's a column about what's happening at the port. We hold public forums. We hold public open forums. When we had the group of 33, when Chris Cuse was our executive director, with trying to get the old Safeway property in the port together, we had a lot of discussion. We had 33 residents work that plan. So there's been many public open hearings. We're very transparent on everything that we have done. We're in the paper. Our meetings minutes are in the paper. Our notices are in the paper. They're in the Beacon. I mean, I don't know what else we can really do. We can't beg people to come to meetings, only when there's a hot topic. The last time the Port Commission meeting was ever full, when the marina collapsed. And I had been there during that tenure. I went to meetings for 4 years before that. So I've been involved with all the communications that the port has been doing for the last 22 years. But it's very important to know that we have very open, transparent meetings. If people would come, and if our other candidates ever came to our meetings, they would know that as the president this year and all the years, we haven't our first agenda item is public comment for anything that is not on our agenda. Anything that's on your mind, please come. But then we have on the other.
Thank you, Mr. Gouch. Ms. Petzo, it's now your turn to go first, and then Mr. Ferris. The question is regarding impacts on the marsh.
Redevelopment of land areas surrounding the marsh, I wouldn't. I have studied this marsh issue enough to know that the area surrounding the marsh is to be used for a vegetated buffer, not for buildings. And you can't have both, okay? So let's just assume for a moment we're going to figure out the appropriate marsh buffer. Hint, ecology says it's 150 feet. Council chose 110, probably in a spirit of compromise. My sense is that most of the public can live with that 110-foot buffer. So now let's get busy and declare it a buffer. Let's not redevelop it. Let's re-vegetate that marsh buffer and contribute it to the marsh. Then we take advantage of it as a tourism opportunity, as an environmental education opportunity. We use the fact that this property next to the marsh buffer and next to the marsh is different than other parcels of property in Edmonds. We don't need to treat them all the same, but we can recognize the difference and use that in our planning. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Petzo. Mr. Ferris, would you like the question read? It's the question regarding the marsh, impacts on the marsh. If the opportunity arose, what redevelopments on the land areas surrounding the marsh would you propose to incorporate with the marsh as an asset rather than a hindrance to development?
There's a couple of keys to that question. One of them is if the opportunity arose, and right now there's no opportunity. Speaking strictly of Harbor Square, which is a small part of the periphery of the marsh, there's no opportunity to redevelop Harbor Square in concert with the city zoning requirements. We can't get there from here, and the port has no plans to redevelop anything in Harbor Square. With regard to the rest of the periphery of the marsh, which is by far the majority of it, one chunk of it presently belongs, I think, to Chevron, and it's supposed to end up being owned by WashDOT as soon as they complete the cleanup. WashDOT has like 50-year out plans to turn that into a big parking lot. I don't know much about that, because I do know that would only happen when they move, if and when they move the ferry dock. I don't know much about that because that specifically doesn't pertain to Harbor Square or the port. If I look at the other edges of the marsh, there's not much room for development. But specifically at Harbor Square, it needs to be noted that there's no plan, there's no opportunity to redevelop Harbor Square, because the buildings that are there now are the buildings that are going to result in the owners of the port not having to pay taxes to rebuild the docks and the roads when it's necessary to do so in 30 or 40 years. We need the cash flow from what's there now, and we hope to go forward with no redevelopment of Harbor Square.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. The next question is for Mr. Johnston and then Ms. Payne. Oh, I'm sorry. The next question is for Ms. Payne and then Mr. Johnston, and it's the climate change question. What steps would you propose the port take to address the numerous impacts of climate change, such as water quality, water shortages, rising sea levels, increased energy consumption?
I would first propose to have a climate action plan that would address both sea level and temperature rise and the impacts on the entire waterfront. It's going to happen. We've just got to figure out if it's on a geometric scale or if it's on an exponential scale. When is it going to happen? That's the question that we don't have the answer to. With a 1 degree Fahrenheit rise in temperature, there's going to be an additional 3 feet of water in this area. With a 2 degree Fahrenheit rise in temperature, the inundation from the water will come from the ferry docks all the way to the edge of the Chevron properties. It'll be inundated, we just don't know when. What I would like to see is I would propose to have the port spend more time, and if I was elected, I would do that as well. Working with WashDOT to make sure that any stormwater runoff, roadway runoff, is treated to the highest level possible, to make sure that we don't have the roadway runoff spill into both sides of the old marsh. We also need to make sure that we have energy plans in place. Solarized Edmonds is a great way to go ahead and start talking about maybe finding places to install solar panels, maybe on the roof sheds if that was possible, because they're light enough now. There are other opportunities that we can go ahead and start looking at to make sure that we have a very green port opportunities. And I'd like to lead that charge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. Mr. Johnston, same question about climate change. Would you like it read?
No, that's okay. I think I've
God bless
had
you.
it drummed in a few times. Thank you. Climate change. Well, the port itself doesn't have much to do with land use issues related to climate change. That's a city function, and they've done a good job of establishing a 2-foot foundation, if you will, or rise to try to start addressing that. And I'm sure there'll be more to come. The port is energy conscious. We just replaced a whole bunch of HVAC equipment over in Harbor Square, and energy consumption was one of the significant concerns at that time to make sure they were energy efficient, et cetera. As far as solar power and other alternative power, sure, I think it'd be fine to look into that and have a plan to moving forward in that direction. As far as cleaning up stormwater and wastewater related to port operations, Port does a magnificent job and has many environmental awards based on what they have done, both mostly on the Puget Sound waterfront, where we treat our pressure wash water in a state-of-the-art treatment system before it goes to Puget Sound, where we filter our boatyard runoff through oyster shells, ground oyster shells, which was groundbreaking, and many other ports have now followed that. So we were in the van, we were the forefront of improvements to stormwater and wastewater runoff, or pressure wash water runoff to Puget Sound. We have also done a lot at Harbor Square, just about everything we could to improve the quality of stormwater to the marsh. We put in a new storm drain system. We have filtration in our storm drains, eco-friendly roofs on the on Harbor Square, and more is to come.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. We're now to the part of the program where each candidate can ask a question of their opponent.
We can't start more.
That's right. That we got a meeting.
What do you want to do? Okay. We're going to now have a part of the program. Can the incumbent commissioners, can we go, we're trying to get you to your meeting at 7. Should we?
Why don't you let me do a closing statement so I can go open the meeting, because I've got public waiting there.
Okay. We will eliminate the portion, which was what John was asking me to do anyway. So we will eliminate the portion of asking one another questions.
I think the point
Only
is,
for one.
I think the point is that we need one commissioner there to have a quorum and the president to start the meeting. We all need to be there for the budget discussion, which can be postponed 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, that's fine.
So
Thank you for
Fred needs to go as soon as
Since I don't have
possible.
a
The rest of
opponent,
us
can't
need to
ask
be on
questions,
his.
I can do a closing statement.
a great idea. Thank you, Mr. Gouch. Go ahead, and you get 2 minutes for your closing statement because your opponent is not
All
here.
right. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I have 32 years of experience in aerospace engineering and design and aerospace engineering consulting firm ownership. I'm retired from that business since 1996. Now I'm a licensed commercial and residential broker and company owner and CFO of this company, and we do over $20 million a year in business. So I have the qualifications in that place. I've been involved in the marina for the last 35 to 40 years. I've been an Edmonds resident since 1962. I'm a member of the City of Edmonds Economic Impact Arts Advisory Group. I'm liaison to the Edmonds City Council. I'm a former member of the Edmonds Transportation Committee and Edmonds Crossing Project and the Edmonds Sea Scout Program, Edmonds Community College Foundation's President Club, parent advocate for Special Olympics Trials Drive, and all aboard. You know, over the last 18 years overseeing the port, you know, I went to meetings for 4 years before I even ran for commissioner, so I needed to know what was really going on there. And so, you know, my goal now is to continue to be a financial steward and environmental steward of the port's assets. One thing we haven't talked about tonight is the money of the port. We oversee $100 million worth of assets, $50 million in port hard assets, and $50 million in people's boats. That's a heck of a responsibility to make sure. You know, we've had fires. We have a lot of things going on. We take this very seriously. We run a business. And one thing we haven't done, in the last 10 years, we have not raised our property taxes because we have got a great financial model and a great commission. And we have no plan on ever raising the property taxes. We would not want to raise property taxes for people who have new docks. You wouldn't like that. So, I mean, people pay for what they use nowadays. That's our financial model. You know, I mean, I've reduced public bond debt from $18 million to $3 million in the last 10 years. That means the taxpayer is off the hook in the next 30 months with no more debt from the port. That's a lot of debt to be able to do. Was that 2 minutes? Okay.
Don't argue with the boss.
Okay, thank you. I've got to go start a public meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Gouch, for your participation. We're now going to back up, and we're going to have the opponents question one another. The first is Mr. Ferris, who will pose a question to Ms. Petso, and then we'll reverse that. Remember, you have 15 seconds to ask your question. None of these Harbor Square kind of questions like we've been asking. 15 seconds, and then the opponent has 60 seconds to answer. Ms. Petso? Oh, I'm sorry.
I could have sworn that.
Please fire
You
me.
yelled at me first. Okay,
Mr. Ferris, you go first, thank you.
Okay, Laura, my question really is, your campaign signs have stressed the Save Our Marsh theme. Given that both the Department of Ecology and the tribes have stressed that stormwater runoff is by far the largest threat to the health of the marsh, and that the port only contributes 3% of that stormwater, what would you, as a port commissioner, do to save our marsh?
The emphasis is on protecting the marsh, and I refuse to accept the false choice that I have to do one thing and not the others. So in other words, I would look to partner on stormwater treatment. I would look to reduce pesticide use by the port near the marsh. I would look to set aside some money for daylighting. The fact that something is the most important contributor to problems at the marsh is not the key. I don't sit around in my car with the grandkids and say, it's more important for me to drive safely than it is to buckle them in. That's not how I handle it. I drive safely and I buckle them in. We can do both. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Petso. Your 15-second question, and then Mr. Ferris, your 60-second answer.
In 2013, the voters' pamphlet statement of Bruce Ferris says, "The port respects the Edmonds City Council's authority to make land use decisions regarding Harbor Square's future. Therefore, the port must develop a plan different than that submitted previously for Harbor Square." My question is, why did you not honor that commitment?
The answer is pretty easy. We looked, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Excuse me. The answer is pretty easy. It turns out when you look at that plan, which is the one that's presently shown on the books but not being implemented, versus where the city is and what the land use regulations are, there is no plan that's economically feasible that meets both the economics required to replace the present buildings that are there, and at the same time would be acceptable to the community in the person of the city council. So right now, under the present zoning conditions, we can't get there from here. There is no other plan that we know of that makes any economic sense, and that is our job after all. Therefore, the port has no plans to develop Harbor Square, and as far as I'm concerned, the present zoning requirements are the ones we're working to at Harbor Square.
We did look.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. The next questioning is between Mr. Johnston and Ms. Payne. Mr. Johnston, excuse me, you can go first and ask your opponent a question. You have 15 seconds, and then Ms. Payne has 60 seconds to respond.
Thank you. The primary charter of public ports under state law is economic development. Any money spent on park or environmental enhancement of non-port property must be tied to port projects that provide net revenue generation. Given this, what would you, as a port commissioner, have done differently over the last 5 years?
Thank you. I would have asked to have more tourism and touristic sort of opportunities put in place, put in an environmental learning center, conference center. Those will also bring in the economic development opportunities for the port. There are other opportunities. You can go ahead and find ways funding. I've attended your meetings, and you've talked about maybe having a long pier that go out there and have a nice long pier. You've talked about what are there if there are opportunities to go ahead and have the mosquito fleet. I think these are opportunities that should be looked at more fully. You do have a capacity problem. You have capacity problems with parking. You have capacity problems elsewhere. What you can go ahead and do is look at other aspects of the port's business areas to go ahead and expand. And that's what I would support. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Payne, it's now your opportunity to ask a question of Mr. Johnston in 15 seconds. He's a very good reader, so go.
All right, there we go. So, as an environmentalist, because I know you are, and I know you care about the environment, why would you have thought the environmental buffer, or why did you not suggest any changes to the Harbor Square Master Plan when it was last reviewed by the Port Commission just earlier this year?
Yeah, that's good.
3 of them down
Turn
there.
on.
You got them all.
Hang on just a second. Okay, right here. Okay. That's right. Yes, I am an environmentalist. I spent my entire career, 35 years, putting projects on the ground in harmony with natural resources. The human equation, the natural resource equation. They not only work together, they can enhance each other. I did not make any recommendations to the Harbor Square Master Plan earlier because I knew it was, excuse the terminology, dead in the water and was not going anywhere. There are ways in the future, if you ever want to redevelop Harbor Square, if you ever want to enhance the marsh, we have to put the humans in the equation. It's imperative. We're a city, 42,000 people. We live in one of the most greatest natural resources areas that there are. We respect that, the port respects that, everybody in this room respects that. So bottom line is, let's put future development and economics in balance with natural resources. I know how to do it. I've done it for 35 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Done. I'm going to get that right. And again, my apologies. With a name like Buell, you'd think I'd be more sensitive, wouldn't you? So I'm going to change the order of the closing statements here, just so the 2 incumbents can leave if they so choose. Mr. Ferris, would you like to?
Sure, if I can find a mic.
We've got all this in
Pass
the
these
table.
things around like.
We're collecting them.
Is this one, yeah, this one.
Collector's
Okay. So, I got what, 90 seconds?
Is that what you said?
60 seconds.
60 seconds. Gotta go
15 gone.
So, what's the truth here? Okay, there's 3 questions the voters need to answer. The first question is, have the environmental considerations at Harbor Square been a top priority at the port or not? Yes or no? And as far as I know, there are no legal projects, programs, or actual improvements of any significance at Harbor Square that could have been undertaken that were not. That doesn't talk about the future, that doesn't talk about, maybe that talk about, did anybody move any dirt, and we moved all the dirt we could, I believe. Second question, have the port's efforts on behalf of our local economy been effective or not? The answer is yes. There are over 70 businesses at the port that contribute to the local economy, a tourism program that didn't exist before that we've worked really hard and that brings thousands of people to our community annually, and employment of over 800 people that directly trace their jobs to the port. Third question, has the port been managed in a properly balanced manner or not? The results, environmental, financial, and in terms of usefulness to the Edmonds and Woodway community, clearly show excellence in both planning and execution. Hey, we've done a good job. We've tried to keep it straight and tried to keep it in balance. Public input has always been important to any decision. People tell you that isn't true, they're lying. The port staff and commission has to balance all issues when deciding how best to move forward. And unfortunately, not everybody gets everything they want out of those discussions. We have an example of local government that works. The commission and staff have been successful in finding balanced answers to complex questions and questions. I believe we have the best run port in the state, and I mean that. And I've been told that by others, not just around Edmonds. And I'm asking for your vote to continue that excellence in the port.
We need to get out of here.
Thank you, Mr. Ferris. Mr. Johnston?
Thank you.
Oh, we need to get out of here.
Okay. You haven't heard enough about our financial performance is important. That's a key issue. Our main mission is economic development. We bring that incredibly well to the community. So we have an enviable environmental record. We've won numerous environmental awards and achieved the highest environmental certifications and ratings available to ports. Now let's dispel some myths. The port has no intention of activating the Harbor Square redevelopment concept that was withdrawn in 2013. The issues of tall buildings at Harbor Square for the foreseeable future is a red herring. The port cleaned up Harbor Square voluntarily. Cleanup activities and planning started long before any lawsuit was filed. The cleanup was conducted entirely under Ecology's voluntary cleanup program. There was no contamination from past industrial activities currently entering the marsh from Harbor Square. The Harbor Square cleanup was effective and subsequent groundwater monitoring indicated no migration of residual contamination. The port is well managed, provides a substantial benefit to the community, and has a sterling record of environmental stewardship. I'm endorsed by a broad spectrum of nonpartisan community leaders, port professionals, scientists, engineers, friends, and neighbors. I am not endorsed by any special interest. I ask for your vote in November to keep the port success and momentum going. Thank you.
And unfortunately, we need to go to work. We have to go, sorry, folks.
Mr. Ferris and Mr. Johnston, thank you very much. You can go wherever you want, Mr. Ferris. Thank you.
Have fun, folks.
Ms. Payne, it's your turn.
Thank you. So with this election, I want you to remember that it will be a close election and your vote really counts. Why is this important? This past March, the current panel of port commissioners decided to not make any changes to the Harbor Square Master Plan. This plan includes residential units and taller than code building heights. Residential units, I said this earlier, are problematic. They are inflexible for economic development, and as you've heard from all of us tonight, that economic development is one of the primary purposes of the port. And it also privatizes the viewing areas and the visual access to the marsh and to the waterfront. Residential is a non-starter for me. The Edmonds Marsh needs to have strong environmental stewardship, and this is a glaring absence by the current commission and my opponent. They spent $84,000 to challenge the environmental buffers as decided by City Council. And that's environmental stewardship in the negative way. They're trying to make sure that they could go ahead and have their plan as it existed in the past. What I would do is I would create a climate and sea level action plan for the port and reopen the Harbor Square master plan for more public comment and more input from all the stakeholders. I would also bring a renewed energy on the commission that would jointly look for tourism and other opportunities to highlight our rare and wonderful marsh. They also need to act together to make a plan to restore the marsh, because that's going to be a big economic driver in terms of tourism and other touristic sort of opportunities. I would like to have you vote for me, and my name is Susan Payne, and I'm running for Port Commission, and thank you very much for all of your time.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. Ms. Petzl?
Thank you. Yeah, there we go. Works better if I turn it on. I want to take the opportunity to thank ACE for providing this opportunity for us tonight. And I want to thank the groups who have endorsed me this year: Sierra Club, National Women's Political Caucus, and 32nd District Democrats. I'm very grateful for their support. I am running this time to be responsive to the community and to protect the marsh. And these are important things that need to get done. You heard at the last candidates forum actually that there was no Harbor Square master plan. But we pointed out that yes, there is one and it's on the port's webpage. What we heard tonight is it's just a placeholder. It's not allowed to be just a placeholder. This plan is in the nature of a comprehensive plan. So what I will do after this forum is I will look up the statutes and I will attempt to post them somewhere where you all can find them. Because what I believe is that there's one code section that says the plan is required. And there's the following code section that says, and by the way, you have to follow your plan. So no more placeholders, no more evasions. Let's get on with it. Accept the buffer for what it needs to be, or accept council's offer of a compromise at 110 feet, and then we'll make a plan around that. And that's the only way to move this community forward. It's rather odd. I know I've been accused in the past of slowing things down, but just sitting on this plan for 4 years and doing nothing, which is what has happened, after promising to develop a plan different than that submitted previously, is not working for the community. We need better and we deserve better. Please vote in the port election this year and please vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Penso, and thank you, everyone, especially the two that are still here. We are going to take a very short break before we start with the council presentation. So about 3 minutes. Okay, let's get started then with the second part. These are the candidates for city council. There was some confusion, I was told by one gentleman, so maybe it'd be good if you each introduced yourself by name and also which council position you are running for. This way I can also make sure that you're Christiana Johnson and not Johnston.
I am. Ooh. No.
Hello. I am Councilmember Christiana Johnson, and I currently occupy position 1 on the Edmonds City Council, and I am seeking re-election.
Hello, check. This one works. Hello, my name is Josh Thompson, and I am running for position 1 for the Edmonds City Council.
Evening, Mike Nelson, Edmonds City Council, position number 2.
Adrian Furley-Manilis, Edmonds City Council, position number 3, and thank you all for staying here.
Calvin Rudnick, position number 3, Edmonds City Council.
The format for this portion is going to be the same as last. However, we've got more questions than there are people, so there's going to be different questions asked of different people, and this is done in the spirit of fairness, but we've kind of drawn them out of a hat sort of thing. So we will have the questions, and you will have Mim timing you, and then after the questions are completed, you each answer 4 questions, then we'll have the opponent question, like before, 15 seconds ask, 60 seconds respond, and then a 60-second closing statement. So let's let the games begin. The first question is directed to Mr. Thompson and Ms. Johnson, and it is regarding downtown building heights. The question is, if elected, would you vote for height limits that exceed the current 30 feet in downtown Edmonds and along the waterfront? Where and why? And it's Mr. Thompson goes first. I'm sorry.
I am asked this question a lot when I'm doorbelling, and my answer has always been that, you know, I believe we need to protect the postcard. The thing that makes Edmonds stand out is its aesthetic beauty. I am not in favor of raising the height limits. I don't see a foreseeable project that I would agree with. I phrase it sometimes as protect it as long as we can. And people will look at me suspiciously and say, well, what do you mean by that? There are some instances on the horizon as we adapt to climate change and water rise that may change my stance. I do agree with raising the heights up 2 feet to accommodate rising sea level. If the climate change turns out to be more drastic than we've even projected it to be, there will be some adaptation that we need to make. But all in all, I think that we need to keep the downtown corridor as it is as much as we can, because it is the thing that people travel from all over the region to enjoy. Be it our waterfront, be it our downtown core, the businesses, you know, and I'm all for protecting that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Ms. Johnson, would you like the question read again?
No, I've got it.
Thank you.
I'd like to retain my seat in order to hold the line against increased building heights in downtown Edmonds and the waterfront. I know I didn't get this question in advance, but this is my #1 issue. We need to protect our historic downtown. We also need to protect our fragile shoreline area from projected sea level rise and the damaging consequences of king tides and winter storms. Restoration of the marsh is critical for the future of juvenile Chinook salmon and protection of birds and wildlife. I am opposed to the 55-foot urban village development master plan adopted by the Port of Edmonds and withdrawn from council consideration. Port members have stated that they have no plans to redevelop at the current time, and that they are waiting for the council makeup to change to be more favorable to adoption of the master plan. I will stand for the environment, and this is my main motivation for running again.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. This next question is for Mr. Nelson, and it has to do with residential density. Several zoning changes, including accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law apartments, rezoning from single-family to multifamily, and mini homes, are being discussed that could have a major impact on residential density, traffic, and parking throughout Edmonds. In general, do you support making these zoning changes, and why or why not?
That's an easy question. I think that we hear a lot about growth and how it's going to be impacting our community. And usually the first response to growth is we need to have more housing. And I think it's important when we're having these discussions, particularly when you're talking about accessory dwellings or any other types of changes to zonings to accommodate more density, is it the right fit in the neighborhood that folks live in? And how is that additional housing going to impact traffic? How is it going to impact our environment, pollution, congestion? So I don't think you can, I think you have to look at each one of those things individually and separately. I'm not opposed to all of them. I'm not necessarily going to support all of them either. I think it's real important that we just take a very careful approach. I look at our city and I look at #1 reason, if you ask who is a tourist that comes to our city, they're from Seattle. They come here because we're different. We're a different community, different than anywhere else. And we need to keep that. And yes, we have to accommodate that growth, but we also need to preserve what we have in our city.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. The next question is for Ms. Fraley Manilis. It has to do with downtown parking. The question is, downtown parking is an ongoing problem for both residents and business access. What solutions would you propose to address these parking issues?
Well, that's been at the forefront of what I did the year before this last year, and that is we were able to get a parking enforcement officer. Part of the problem with the parking in the downtown core is that people don't adhere to the parking limitations, the time limitations. And that is a major problem Because when people are parking all day in our streets and heading with their golf clubs over to, on the ferry to the other side, that takes away parking spaces for businesses and for citizens. So first off, we need to adhere to the rules, the laws that are out there. Then secondly, I love the idea of lining the parking spaces along the corridors in the downtown, so people know where to park. How many times have people pulled up to parking spaces and you couldn't get your car in there because somebody took like 2 or 3 feet more to put their car in there? So putting those lines along the parking areas, I think, will be a really, really big help. I think encouraging people to carpool and to bus in some of our businesses. We have some great businesses who have lots of employees, and we create business parking areas for them. They're not always adhered to because people don't, potentially don't want to take a really long walk from the areas that they've been assigned to park at. But maybe we should start looking at that and determining what areas we have in Edmonds that have vacant lots that maybe could be rented to be used for that sort of parking for business owners and their employees. So I think there's lots of different things. Thank you, ma'am.
The next question is for Mr. Rutledge. It's involving transparency. What changes would you make in City Council meeting, publicity, and decision-making procedures to increase transparency and encourage community involvement and input into your decision-making process?
First of all, you would have to answer questions at the city council meetings. I've been along here a long time. I first ran here in 1997. And we had planning board meetings at that time. We had different meetings on Friday nights, Thursday nights. It's all been changed over these past years. The changes have to be made is answer the public when they come to the city council meetings. And just like running for city council here, we have an open seat here. So some way we're not getting the people out to run for office in this city. That has to be changed. But your meeting places are a big difference. Your public has to come and ask the city council to change a meeting date for your architect meetings, planning board meetings, whatever meetings you have. The public has to come and do that. And until that happens, you're not going to change your meetings. So my solution would be to come and force the council to do a better time, a better date, if you're interested in coming to the meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. The next question will be directed to Ms. Johnson and then Mr. Thompson. And it's the question regarding residential density. Several zoning changes, including accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law apartments, rezoning from single-family to multifamily, and mini homes are being discussed that could have a major impact on residential density, traffic, and parking throughout Edmonds. In general, do you support making these zoning changes, and why or why not? Ms. Johnson.
The City Council will begin a rather lengthy housing study beginning shortly. And the purpose of this study is to work with consultants and the community to answer each of these questions. I don't have the answers right now, but I do know that there are lots of illegal mother-in-law apartments that are rented out in the city. People just keep it quiet. They might have a basement that they with a separate entrance, and they rent that out and get some extra income. One of the things that I'm really concerned about is we had a major rezone, about 20 years ago, and it had the unintended consequence of almost removing all of our historic buildings, because the historic buildings were built on medium-sized lots, and when you changed it to change the density, what you did is you created economic value in the land. And suddenly, you could build 2 houses on what was previously a lot for just 1 house. And so it had the unintended consequence of changing our entire landscape in the city. So I think that these are important questions. I think some of them can be easily done, and others will be more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Thompson, would you like the question read again?
If you wouldn't mind.
I wouldn't mind at all. It's what I get paid for. Residential density. Several zoning changes, including accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law apartments, rezoning from single-family to multiple-family, and mini-homes are being discussed that could have a major impact on residential density, traffic, and parking throughout Edmonds. In general, do you support making these zoning changes, and why or why not?
In general, I do support a lot of the ideas. But again, I believe in that old adage of measuring twice or 3 times and cutting once. Not all of these are appropriate for all lots. Sometimes in order to keep up with our desperate need for housing, in the past, we've made decisions that had unintended consequences. One being low-density multifamily residential units, which could not absorb the parking for the residents, which caused people with large vehicles or multiple vehicles to park outside of their own development, which impacts the neighborhoods. Now, these were unintended consequences. These were trying to shoehorn as many houses onto a lot as possible. But when you do that, many of us have driven through Esperance and seen examples of these. Where there are houses or townhouses, many in a row, that have no yards. For those people with children and families, that need for open space, it pushes the kids out into the street. It makes them need the parks all the more, but the lack of sidewalks getting there, the traffic along 2-lane roads that don't have sidewalks. All of these are consequences of where we put people. And I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Very respectfully done. Mr. Nelson, this is yours. And the question is regarding your incumbency as a councilor. What are you most proud of in the time that you have served on City Council, and what legislation do you intend to offer in the next 4 years?
It's a tough one. I think I'm probably most proud of my work on the resolution to promote gun safety and the ordinance to require reporting of stolen and lost firearms. I think as a gun owner, I think we need to really do a better job of promoting reducing gun violence, and there's a lot of simple steps we can do. Unfortunately, there's a lot of limitations what cities can do in the state of Washington, and I for one think that it's time that if the state isn't going to do anything to prevent gun violence, well then they need to give us the authority to give it us back so we can. Because unfortunately, what happened in Las Vegas is just the beginning, and it's just going to keep on happening, and what is killing people is unfortunately not just mass shootings, it's suicides, it's accidental firearms. There have been over 800 people shot since Las Vegas, 247 people killed in that 1 week after Las Vegas. So it's a chronic problem that we need to continue to work on. So as far as future legislation, I plan to do more and whatever I can to work on that, as well as I think addressing more of our climate crisis. I think that when 70% of all the emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, are coming from cities, we have the moral responsibility to take our steps to make a difference. And if the President of the United States isn't going to do it, well, by God, we're going to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Mr. Rutledge, this next question is for you. It has to do with reducing the size and expense of government. What would you propose, if elected, to reduce the size and expense of government to avoid new or higher taxes?
First of all, I have not seen the new budget that came out. This city continuously, every year, your revenue keeps going up, your expenses keep going up. the budget this coming year is said you're gonna hire more people in the town, which means that your administration is running good here. But as far as what you're gonna do to cut your staff down and everything, that's a questionable answer, and the solution that would be, you just had a salary commission here just recently raised the rates for the city council members here. What you would do is try to get enough money for a daily wage for a council member to spend one day into the city. And you got 7 council members going around one day in the city to go through all the departments head on, and then they come back and say whether they're gonna cut staff. This is something that might happen eventually down the road here in the city if the economy goes down, our revenue goes down. This would help stop a layoff. So that would be my problem, but I have not seen the new budget come out yet.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. The next question is for Ms. Fraley Manilis, and it's regarding homelessness. Edmonds has a small but growing homeless population, which the senior center serves with its emergency cold weather shelter. What can the city do to reduce homelessness and more effectively aid this population?
Boy, if I could answer that tonight, wouldn't that be a great thing? I've actually spent time down here at the Cold Weather Senior Center. I've counted the people, I've talked to the people, I just haven't assumed that they're here. I've gone through, and I know where they're coming from. Some are working homeless. A lot of that has to do with the inability to be able to pay for housing. People are being moved right out of housing because they cannot afford the rents. And that is just something that we should never have allowed as a country, to allow people to be homeless because the working poor. I mean, there are many different levels of homelessness in our city as in other cities. I actually, I couldn't get any traction 5 or 6 years ago on the homeless issue as I was seeing it, because I do live along the Highway 99 corridor, so I'm at the forefront of it. And what it took, unfortunately, after many complaints from me and many discussions for a whole lot of people in government, I had to bring in the media. I brought in congressional people, I brought in state senators, I brought in House members, and we went looking at the homeless. There was a count that was done a couple of years ago by one of our city council members was on the count, and they came back and said there were 3 homeless people in a count. And I asked them, did you go to the homeless encampments? And they went, what homeless encampments? They're there.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley Manilis. The next question is for Mr. Thompson, and then followed by Ms. Johnson. Mr. Thompson, you're first. This is the longest question in history regarding Harbor Square redevelopment.
Do you need to break it up in parts?
I need a lozenge and a scotch.
Water.
Despite rejection of the port's master plan for Harbor Square by City Council in 2013, the port in March 2014 added what essentially is the same rejected plan to its east side master plan. Major issues in the port plan are zoning is changed from commercial to mixed commercial residential uses. Building height is increased from the current 35 feet to an overall average height of 45 feet and maximum height of up to 55 feet adjacent to the marsh. And minimum setback off Dayton Street is a 15-foot sidewalk, and no stated setback from the marsh is included as compared to the 25-foot setback originally included in the March proposal. Do you support the specific parameters listed above, and why or why not?
I do not support the plan as it is now. And I believe that the city is doing the work and has done the work. I mean, it's ongoing. That will provide the framework that any development that goes in will have to follow. You know, my focus over the years my attention, I should say, has really been on wastewater specifically, just because I think water management is a big problem in the area and it's only going to get worse. But I have met with people who have educated me more on the impacts of where buildings are based on setback, and all of those type of details. And I've learned a lot over the years. But I don't support the plan that the port currently has. I take them at their word that the plan is dead, that there is nothing ongoing. But I also know that the city council stands in the way of any project that comes forward. Any approval will be done by the city council. And I believe the council has expressed themselves pretty clearly that they don't accept this type of project. And I am in agreement with that. I do believe that we need to get moving on dealing with wastewater a little bit more, on the flooding parking lots, on dealing with those issues that we can do without development. And yes, ma'am.
I'm afraid I need to repeat it because I got lost listening.
Okay, but only if I can call you Johnston. Okay.
That's a deal.
Ms. Johnson, here's the question. Despite rejection of the port's master plan for Harbor Square by City Council in 2013, the port in March 2014 added what essentially is the same rejected plan to its east side master plan. Major issues in the port plan are zoning is changed from commercial to mixed commercial residential. Building height is increased from the current 35 feet to an overall average height of 45 feet and maximum height of up to 55 feet adjacent to the marsh. And minimum setback off Dayton Street is a 15-foot sidewalk and no stated setback from the marsh is included as compared to the 25-foot setback originally included in the port proposal. Do you support the specific parameters listed above and why or why not?
I'm going to rephrase this because I'm really well versed in this plan. And in fact, the City Council did not reject the plan in 2013. We had a very healthy discussion. It wasn't always civil. And the port withdrew their plan. It became apparent that it was going to be a tough sell, and so they decided to withdraw it. When they adopted it into their long-range strategic plan, they were basically saying, okay, this is our plan, we stand by it, and we'll just wait until the City Council changes so that we can move forward. The basis for the plan was a contract rezone. It was made between the city and the port. It specified the number of stories could only be 2 stories. There could be no residential, and the maximum height was 35 feet. These were the conditions that we're considering. Ooh, I could talk about this forever, but see, she's reaching for it. Now I lost my place. But basically, there is no setback according to that contract rezone. What there was a 25-foot open space, and I'll have to talk about this plan a little bit later, but to summarize, I do not support this plan at this time because in the 4 years since, I've had many, many conversations with the port, and they have not compromised.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Nelson, this question is for you. It's regarding improved transparency. What changes would you make in City Council meeting, publicity, and decision-making procedures to increase transparency and encourage community involvement and input into your decision-making process?
I think, like most city councils that meet in the evening, and a lot of times, it's right after folks are gone to work. I work full-time. I sometimes struggle to get there on time myself. And most of the time, yeah, we look into an empty audience. We are televised, and we do have minutes. But I think something that Snohomish County Council did is interesting, and I would be open to the idea of doing a road tour, and that is to have city council meetings in different places, several times, 4 or 6 times a year throughout the city, so that people who normally come to a meeting, let's say up in Highway 99, we could have a special council meeting up there or down here at the senior center. So I think coming to where the citizens are, and maybe they have some mobility access issues, that we can come to them, I think is one way to do it. I think, recently we went to committee meetings, and unfortunately we don't have those televised. I think we need to find a way to have those also televised. Because again, I think with just meeting minutes, you're not really getting a sense of where we are in the substance of the issues that we're debating.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. This next question is for Ms. Fraley Manilis and then Mr. Rutledge. The question is regarding residential density. Several zoning changes, including accessory dwelling units, mother-in-law apartments, rezoning from single family to multiple family, and mini homes are being discussed that could have a major impact on residential density, traffic, and parking throughout Edmonds. In general, do you support making these zoning changes, and why or why not? And it's Ms. Fraley Manilis first.
Thank you. Well, I have concerns. I won't say that I'm against all forms of this, because I think there may be some opportunities for perhaps seniors that could perhaps move into a smaller dwelling on their property while renting out their house. I mean, there are some, I think, good things about this. It also may help with putting together some level of housing that's less expensive for folks to rent. That being said, the real big concern to this is traffic. Our roads are not meant to have in the neighborhoods the number of traffic that could bring. Parking could be a great issue. And for those of us that live along the Highway 99 corridor, unless you're living on a main arterial, you have no sidewalks. You have no sidewalks to get to your park. You have no lighting that protects you in getting where you're going. So I think that there's some concerns. Also, our infrastructure is not developed enough for the water, the sewer, the electricity. I mean, there's a lot of questions out there. So I'd be interested to hear more about it. I won't say I totally disagree with it, but I'm not necessarily believing right now that it's probably a great idea unless we get more information. There's just too many what ifs still with it. And I know some cities have done it, like Seattle, but I don't want to look like Seattle nor Ballard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley Manilis. Mr. Rutledge, same question. Would you like it read again? Thank you.
Several years ago, the city went out and closed down some houses. Now, what happened was years ago was that people were coming in and building an apartment downstairs, water, sewers, they were hooking up everything down there. There's more than one of them. So this has been going on a number of years. Your city planning department knows everything that my opponent just got done saying. It's been going on for several years. And we used to have years ago a problem with a mother and daughter moving in their home, son-in-law moving in. That's all been changed. That's all taken care of. Where I'm at, there's a lot of people I know that the families are moving into their homes, which is fine. What's happening is you got a permit process coming when you come in, when you remodel your house, new bedroom, wash and dryer downstairs, sink, the whole thing has to be changed. So if this is what you want to get increased population to meet our growth in the city, this will bring in more people. The city knows all about transportation, cars and all that in neighborhoods. The neighborhood people know about this too.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. Ms. Johnson, this question is for you. As an incumbent councilor, what are you most proud of in the time you've served on Edmonds City Council, and what legislation do you intend to offer in the next 4 years?
During my first few months on the city council, I was very pleased to introduce Robert's Rules of Order. I was surprised to learn that the city had been using some 1973 rules of operations that had nothing to do with the way modern government should be governed. And since then, I initiated a study for the SR 104 corridor known as Edmonds Way, and that was to assist in formulating the Westgate plan. So now we have not only a land use plan, but a transportation plan for that entire corridor. Following that, I was proud to work on the Highway 99 sub-area plan, and more recently, I was very proud. This took a long time, believe me, but I initiated a zero waste policy for the city of Edmonds. That means that every festival and every event we have in town, such as the farmers market, is a zero waste policy event, and we encourage recycling and food recycling and proper garbage dismissal. I think there was another part of the question about in the future.
Yes, 4 years.
Oh, in the next 4 years? Oh my. I want to do two things before the end of this year. I want to reinstitute the Transportation Committee. This was abolished prior to Dave Erling, and I also want to get a bicycle helmet law for bicyclists.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Thompson, your question is regarding being a potential first-time counselor. If you are elected, identify 2 or 3 proposals that you would make or advocate for in the next 4 years.
Some of the things that have interested me most as a citizen is working on the Highway 99 sub-area plan as well. Spending a year and a half attending public meetings. One of the things that I was a little bit resistant to that the council did was embedding design standards within the new the zones. I would like to look at more flexibility on those, on commercial properties. I would like to know more about what these plans will do for traffic flow. I want to know how that they are going to affect our customer base, since tens of thousands of people go through there, and we have competing businesses to the north and south of us. Just as somebody who lives just a few blocks off 99, I know what increased business and increased congestion can do for public safety. I don't, I know this issue. I believe I heard one of you say, we've talked about this 14 times in separate meetings. But one of the things, I didn't hear all of them, but one of the things that did concern me was what these new design standards will do to traffic flow. Because every day I drive through an intersection where there are dozens of near misses, and just the other day, 3 lanes were blocked down because of a collision. And that was simply due to the placement of a driveway. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Nelson, this question is for you regarding downtown parking. Downtown parking is an ongoing problem for both residents and businesses. What solutions would you propose to address these parking issues?
I think it's a combination. I think we obviously have to offer more parking spots. In some ways, I know we're already exploring to do angled parking. We also need to enforce the parking laws that we have. We know a lot of people there that park and stay there all day. We as a council, we have tried to remedy that by bringing on board a part-time parking enforcement officer, and the conversations I've heard with business owners, they have noticed an improvement. It'd be great if we could have that full-time. It'd be great if we could have them focus just on downtown. I think that would alleviate a good chunk of the parking. I'm not in favor of making some sort of parking structure down there. I don't think that's necessary, but I think if we can find ways to readjust the parking spaces and more enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. This question is for Ms. Fraley-Manilis. It involves improved transparency. What changes would you make in City Council meetings, publicity, and decision-making procedures to increase transparency and encourage community involvement and input into your decision-making process?
Thank you, that's a good one. Since I've been on council, we've now, we televise the meetings, and the meetings weren't televised for many, many years. And when I first got on council, it was right about the time we started the televising of it. Maybe it was shortly before then. So I think that has been of some big help. Another part of transparency is for us to make our decisions out in the open on the dais. And we seem to have a problem, I guess you would say, in our city of 2 and 3 of us being called in to meet to talk about the issues that are coming before the citizens. Almost as I've talked about vote getting or counting, vote counting, to find out where people are going to land in. I don't think that's transparent. There have been many times where I've refused to participate in this just because I'm very, very, very uncomfortable with that sort of transparency. I do think that we listen to citizens that come to the mic. We listen to citizens that email us, but for whatever reason, it tends to be the same people that come to us on a frequent basis. So I would like to figure out a way how to reach the 22% of people that live in Edmonds that are not white. There are 22% of Edmonds is people of color, and we don't seem to be able to reach them with any sort of certainty. So that is a goal that we need to have. And I think having meetings up along the corridor may help that.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley-Manilis. The last individual question goes to Mr. Rutledge, and it is as respects a potential first-time counselor. If you are elected, identify 2 or 3 proposals that you would make or advocate for in the next 4 years.
My first one would be neighborhood protection, which we need because we're getting, almost every day, we're getting calls there in the city. Secondly is increased revenue to support businesses downtown in Edmonds here. Without revenue coming in, they would leave. And there's several other issues that has to be addressed, but I'll point it out one more time. Neighborhood protection. You have to have more protection, more police out in the streets to help us out. And so we have to get an increased revenue to pay for that for the city, of the residents here in the city. And the third issue would be transportation. I've mentioned this several times. We have to have a bus system, 4 corners, north, east, south, west. Pick up residents, bus them downtown Edmonds, do their shopping, go back home again. That's your solution. That is going to happen here. This is 217. You might be all on the ground by then, but it's going to come here sometime. It'll be here. That is to get the people to do their own shopping. And the last thing would be on the same issue is the wage. We have to make sure that we have a family wage here, is to keep the businesses in town and get the residents to come.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. That concludes the individual questions. We're now entering the portion of the program where you who have opponents here can ask a question of that opponent. We're going to start with Mr. Thompson posing a question to Ms. Johnson. And you have 15 seconds for the question and then 60 seconds to respond.
Well, you actually stole my question, so I'm going to have to change it a little bit.
Okay.
Councilmember Johnson, is there anything you regret from your time on the council?
One of the earliest decisions that I regretted then and still today was very small. It was approval of a final plat subdivision off 220th. The problem that I have is, as a transportation planner, we're not supposed to build cul-de-sacs, we're supposed to build transportation systems. And they allowed for a planned unit development and put all of the open space right up against 220th. But all the utilities were in place, everything was done, the engineering, and the most logical thing would be to have the open space be a path connecting to the other streets or another street. And I've talked about this with Shane Hope, and there was really nothing I could have done at the time, but I regret that, and I think we need to do a better job. Thank you.
Thank you both. Ms. Johnson, it's now your 15-second question to Mr. Thompson. Hope I didn't steal yours too.
You did.
Well, it was John. I'm just parroting his question.
Okay. Well,
This is a variation on the theme, but tonight, the port has emphasized over and over again that they have no plans for Harbor Square. Yet, given the opportunity, most people believe that the port will introduce their adopted Harbor Square master plan. If you are elected to this office, I want to find out, first of all, are you familiar with this plan? And secondly, where do you stand on the issues?
With just a minute to answer, I am familiar with the plan. As I said, I don't support it. I think that the whole process from 4 years ago could have been done better. I think it's a reflection of that our government doesn't always function as it should and in the most transparent or friendly or respectful manner. I believe in doing the environmental work in advance. I see that as an opportunity to be an economic driver, to take care of the environment, take care of the regulations that will protect our critical areas, and then work with what parameters are left to work with. I think developers will always find a way. And I've heard tonight that it doesn't pencil out, but honestly, I think they could, I heard somebody said they could build on the side of an asteroid if you told them that's all that they could do. All right.
Thank you. The next opponent questioning is between Mr. Rutledge going first with a question for Ms. Fraley-Manillas. 15-second question, 60-second response.
Yes, she presented a resolution in the city for Sanctuary City, for welcoming the city. My question would be, why didn't you go with the process and let the voters in Edmonds vote whether they want to have this a sanctuary city or not?
Great question, Mr. Rutledge. It's actually not a sanctuary city. We did not vote on a sanctuary city resolution. A sanctuary city resolution was never presented. Only a safe city resolution was presented to the council, and we did take comments from people. There was comments out of our diversity commission, as well as we received lots of comments at the mic, as well as in email. But that's a very, very good question. So I hope that brings some clarity for you a little bit, that there is a difference between a sanctuary city and a safe city. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley-Manillas. That concludes the questioning this evening.
oh,
I'm sorry.
I need to ask him one.
Oh, darn. Is your name Johnston? I seem to be screwing that up.
Could be.
Ms. Fraley-Manillas, it's now your turn to ask a 15-second question of Mr. Rutledge, who can reply in 60 seconds
Sure.
or less.
You know, that was really, I loved hearing about some of your goals you would have if you're on the council. The neighborhoods for more police, the increased revenue, the cross-city transportation, and the family wage jobs. I think those are all very admirable areas to be working on. But what I'd like to hear from you is maybe some areas you think you could increase revenue. Where would you increase, or how would you increase revenue on the city council if you had that opportunity?
increased population. You have to bring in more people in the city here. You have a great Growth Management Act here, which is supposed to have 6,000 people come in here in the next 3 years. Up on Highway 99, we're building increase there, homes, apartments around the city. So as far as increased revenue going, that is where your increase is to bring in more people into the city here. And now we're getting back to transportation on buses for getting from one end to the other end, that to get down there faster. You don't have to park a car, you don't have to wait a half hour to drive 2-3 miles or whatever. So that's all coming here. If we don't make changes here in this town in 15 years, it's going to take that long to get downtown.
Thank you both. Now this concludes, is that okay with everybody? It's okay with me. This concludes the opponent questioning. We're now going to move into the last portion, which is the closing statement from each candidate. They will each have 60 seconds. The order will be Ms. Johnson, Mr. Thompson, Mr. Nelson, Ms. Fraley-Manilis, and then Mr. Rutledge. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you all for coming here tonight and learning more about the candidates. I really would appreciate your vote. I've served 5.5 years on the City Council, and my promise is no one will work harder for you. I've learned a lot, and I feel that I'm at my most effective at this time. A couple of things that are really important to me. We talked about the environment, but I also like to tell you that historic preservation is very important to me, particularly in the downtown, and I have several ideas about how we could make that better. Finally, the arts are very important to me. I happen to be an artist, so I have a special affinity for this, and I think we need to do more than just talk about the 4th Avenue Arts Corridor. I think we need to take a closer look and see how we can connect our Edmonds Center for the Arts with the Main Street fabulous restaurant row. And I think first we have to take care of the infrastructure, meaning the sewer, the water, the stormwater. Then we can lay down the new roads, put in new sidewalk, and use 1% for arts and make it something really special for this town. I've been talking really fast because I wanted to get all these points in. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you all. And I want to tell you that I've lived in Edmonds for 40 years. Starting in 1954, I went away and then came back. And my career, I spent 30 years working as a environmental planner, transportation planner, land use, trying to develop complex to develop community solutions for complex problems. And I have the education and training that goes with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Thompson?
Thank you. I want to thank everybody who had a part in making tonight happen and for the opportunity to come speak. My name is Josh Thompson. I'm running for Edmonds City Council, and I would love your vote. I have a master's degree in policy analysis. I've been working as a legislative aide for the county council for the last 5.5 years. Every day, I help people navigate government. And oftentimes when they reach out to me, it's because they are desperate. I wish I had answered better earlier. One of the things that I would address if I came to the council is something that came up today in a quarterly meeting on housing. There are thousands of seniors living in substandard housing in Snohomish County. And you think, oh, not in Edmonds. Edmonds is a little more affluent, it's a little more stable, as we've seen in recent articles. But as I'm out doorbelling, talking to thousands of voters, I've seen it. I've seen seniors living in a house that has a blue tarp patching a hole on their roof. Now, the reason why substandard housing is a huge concern is the gray wave we have reference to. The boomers coming in that are planning to retire, planning to live on a fixed income. These small carpentry projects can cost tens of thousands of dollars, and they can result in pushing elderly folks into homelessness. And honestly, the experts on the issue say right now the federal government is not paying much attention to this upcoming catastrophe. Now again, I've been door to door and seen people with dilapidated houses that are trying their best to stay in their home. And you know, again, Edmonds can't solve homelessness issue on its own, but we can be a better vocal partner. We can make sure and do our part to make sure these folks know the services exist and help them get in touch with them. And thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Nelson?
Thank you. In my 2 years on City Council, I've written and passed resolutions, amendments, and ordinances that have promoted safe storage of firearms, required the reporting of stolen and lost firearms, tackled climate change and established renewable energy goals, provided more environmental protections to our critical areas, provided more traffic safety devices and pedestrian safety trainings, helped our businesses with sign code changes, helped select the waterfront emergency access overpass. I've opposed cuts to our fire services, opposed utility tax increases, voted for more affordable housing incentives, the revitalizing of Westgate and Highway 99, more road repair, more sidewalks, just to name a few. If re-elected, I will focus on making sure we have enough police officers to keep crime at bay and enough firefighters to provide emergency care for our growing population. 2, protecting our environment, including our wetlands and our wildlife. And 3, ensuring our city is welcoming with policies that support inclusion and more affordable housing in our community. I hope that you will vote for me, and I promise I will continue to work for you to keep our city safe, healthy, and welcoming for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Ms. Fraley-Manillas?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start out, and many of you have heard my speech, and I'll continue to say it probably for the rest of my life, but I was born and raised in Richmond Beach. I've lived here my whole life. I've lived within 5 miles of the house I grew up in. I had a horse in Woodway, and I've lived in Edmonds for pretty close to 35 years now. Edmonds is my home, and it will always be my home. I see more good things about Edmonds than bad, and maybe that's that sort of look that people give you sometimes, but I think Edmonds is a great place to raise families and to retire at, and that's what I intend to finish doing. Some of the things I want to finish doing is the development of Highway 99. The sub-area plans are finished, but oh, there is so much more work to finish the Highway 99. I've been working on it 7 years, and that's been actively working on it. I've talked to businesses, I've talked to developers, I've talked to realtors, I've talked to staff, I've talked to transit, because we need transit-oriented development in Edmonds. We have to get people to work, and we have to get them to work somehow. With that comes the homelessness issue and how we work on that. I've been appointed to Dave Erling's housing consortium group that's going to look at all the different levels of housing. And we just have to be able to come up with some sort of reasonable solution. I'm chair of the Snohomish County Health District, and one of my passions, for those of you that hear me speak, is on opioids and heroin addiction. The opioids addictions that are out there now and the heroin that's out there now is killing people. We talk about guns killing people, heroin, opioids, it's killing people in every angle, every age, every socioeconomic, every color. It shows no boundaries. So that's another big issue we're going to have to continue to work on. Thank you, Ace, for throwing this little soiree for us. I appreciate everybody being here tonight. And please vote for Adrienne Fraley-Manillas for Edmonds City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley-Manillas. Mr. Rutledge?
And Alvin Rutledge, I'd like to thank ACE and the Senior Center for putting on this event tonight. I thought it was really a nice event here. I've been a resident since 1986. I started to come to the Senior Center in '89. I was involved with the Furlans over there. And then also, we used to take them in December and November every year to give them a party. Those things have all changed. We don't have that anymore. So I've been involved with the senior clubs for a number of years. I attended the city council meetings since 30-some years. A lot of the meetings in town, I belong to several organizations in town, and and we need a change in the city here. And so vote for Al Rutledge for council position number 3. And I guarantee I will be out talking to you in your neighborhoods and your hometowns to get your own areas completed, what you have to have done. That's the main concern, is to make sure you're safe in your neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. And thank you to all of you this evening for participating. Great job. And thank you to John for putting the questions together for the most part, and making all the arrangements this evening, and sucking me in.
Just one request, we have to put all the chairs away. Any of you have a few extra minutes to hang around. I think we stack them back over here, correct?
Yeah, actually, if we just had a little help just stacking in piles of 6 or 7, kind of right where they are, we could handle